December 23, 1944. Just before dawn. Somewhere outside Bostonia. The sky is a solid slab of gray pressed low over the Ardennes like a lid. Snow crunches under boots hardened by weeks without rest. Engines cough then fall silent, their breath turning white and disappearing into the cold. Above it all nothing, no bombers, no fighters, no sound of Allied air power, just clouds, endless clouds. You can almost feel the frustration hanging in the air heavier than the fog. For days, American soldiers have been dying beneath this sky. In the forests and frozen fields of Belgium, German panzer divisions, Panthers, Tigers, assault guns have surged forward under perfect cover. The weather has done what the Luftwaffe no longer can. It has blinded the Allies, grounded the planes, smothered the one advantage the Americans still hold: unquestioned control of the air. Inside Bostonia, the 101st Airborne is surrounded. Ammunition is low. Medical supplies are almost gone. Wounded men lie in barns and cellars, morphine rationed down to drops. German artillery walks methodically across the perimeter, shell by shell, hour by hour. Every American here knows the truth, even if no one says it out loud. If the weather doesn't break, Bostonia falls. And if Bostonia falls, Hitler's gamble might actually work. But nearly 100 miles to the south, in a headquarters warmed by coal stoves and cluttered with maps, General George S. Patton Jr. is staring at the same sky and seeing something entirely different. Patton hates delays, he hates excuses, and above all, he hates surrendering initiative to chance. He stands stiff-backed, ivory-handled, pistols on his hips, helmet liner pushed low on his head even indoors. Around him, staff officers murmur updates in tired voices: road conditions, fuel shortages, frozen hydraulics, stalled movements. All of it sounds dangerously close to resignation. Patton cuts it off with a glare. This weather, he snaps, has been doing more for the Germans than their damned army. The room falls silent. Patton has already done the impossible once this week, turning the entire Third Army north in the dead of winter, executing a maneuver German planners insisted could not be done. His tanks are moving. His infantry is marching. Bostonia will be reached. But reach means nothing without air. And Patton knows it. Outside, the clouds don't move. Inside, Patton makes a decision that will ripple far beyond this room, beyond American lines, beyond Allied headquarters, all the way into the calculations of the German High Command itself. He turns to one man standing slightly apart from the others. Colonel James Hugh O'Neill, Chaplain, 3rd Army. Patton fixes him with a look that allows no misunderstanding. "Chaplain," he says, "I want you to write me a prayer." O'Neill blinks. "A prayer, sir?" "Yes," Patton replies sharply, "a prayer for good weather." For a moment no one speaks. Staff officers exchange glances, some look down at their boots, others stare at the map table as if hoping the lines will rearrange themselves. In a war of steel, logistics, and blood, the idea sounds, well, uncomfortable. Almost theatrical. Patton doesn't care. "We must have fair weather," he continues. "We must have it immediately. The enemy is enjoying this weather, we are not. I want every man in this army to pray for clear skies." This isn't a publicity stunt. There are no reporters present, no cameras, just exhausted men and a general who believes with absolute certainty that morale is a weapon and that belief itself can be decisive. O'Neill nods slowly. "Yes, sir." Within hours, the chaplain drafts the words, simple, direct, unmistakably Patton. "Almighty and most merciful Father, we humbly beseech Thee, restrain these immoderate rains with which we have had to contend, grant us fair weather for battle." Patton reads it, makes minor changes, approves it. Then he orders it printed. Hundreds of thousands of copies are distributed across the Third Army. Soldiers stuff them into jacket pockets, helmet liners, ration tins. Some read it silently, others scoff, a few laugh, many say nothing at all. But almost everyone keeps it. That night the temperature drops even further. Snow hardens into ice. German columns continue to move under the cloud blanket, engines growling confidently, supply trucks rolling unmolested. In the German headquarters, officers take grim satisfaction in the forecasts. The weather, they believe, is on their side. Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, overseeing the offensive in the West, understands exactly what this means. Without Allied air power, the Americans are slower, blinder, more cautious. The Ardennes offensive whacked am Rhine still has teeth. The clouds are buying Germany time. What no one on either side can yet explain, what no meteorologist, no intelligence officer, no general can predict, is that this sky is already changing. Not gradually, violently. And when it breaks, it will do more than reveal the battlefield. It will expose everything the Germans have been hiding beneath it. December 24, 1944. Early morning. Third Army Front. Sometime before dawn, the wind shifts. It's subtle at first, just enough to make a sentry lift his head and squint upward. The clouds are still there, thick and heavy but no longer motionless. They begin to slide, slow and reluctant, like a massive door being forced open inch by inch. A corporal near the Sauer River mutters something no one quite hears. By mid-morning, the gray ceiling has thinned. Not clear, not blue, but thinner. Pilots notice it first. At forward airfields carved into frozen farmland, ground crews pause mid-task, grease-stiffened hands hovering over engine cowls. Someone points. Another man swears softly. Above them, a ragged seam of lighter sky appears, an uneven scar running east to west. Orders crackle over radios almost immediately. Scramble, readiness, stand by. In Bostonia, men of the 101st Airborne feel it before they see it. The shelling hasn't stopped, but something in the air is different. The light changes, shadows sharpen, snow no longer glows flat and dead, it sparkles. A lieutenant steps out of a shattered farmhouse and looks up. For the first time in days, he can see individual clouds. Inside German lines, the reaction is very different. German columns have grown bold under the weather, fuel trucks idle in open clearings. Horse-drawn wagons cluster along forest roads. Panthers and tigers sit nose to tail, engines off, crews smoking, confident the sky is still their ally. They have been told the Americans can't fly. They have been told the weather will hold. At Luftwaffe headquarters, there is no celebration, only anxiety. The German Air Force is a shadow of what it once was. Fuel is scarce, trained pilots scarcer still. If the weather breaks, the Allies won't just fly. They will dominate. By late morning, Patton is outside. Against advice, against comfort, against common sense, he steps into the cold and looks up. His breath fogs instantly. He squints, jaw clenched, reading the sky the way other men read maps. A staff officer approaches cautiously. Sir, reports from IX Tactical Air Command, they believe conditions may improve by midday. May, Patton repeats flatly. Then after a pause, they will. He turns and walks back inside without another word. At 11:45 hours, the clouds tear open. Not gently. They break apart like something shattered from within. Sunlight pours down across the Ardennes, sudden and blinding, glinting off snowfields, frozen rivers, and steel. For American soldiers on the ground, it feels unreal, like stepping out of a cellar after an air raid and finding the city still standing. Then comes the sound. Engines. Not coughing, not distant. Close, fast, layered. P-47 Thunderbolts slash into view, dark shapes against the brightening sky, wings heavy with rockets and bombs. Behind them come Mustangs, then medium bombers, then more fighters. Wave after wave. Men cheer, some shout, others just stare. Inside Bostonia, wounded paratroopers drag themselves toward doorways and windows. One man begins to laugh, a broken, hoarse sound that turns into a sob halfway through. The sky belongs to the Allies again. What follows is not a battle. It is an exposure. German supply columns, so carefully hidden from the air for days, are suddenly naked. Roads choke with vehicles that cannot disperse quickly enough. Horses panic, drivers abandon trucks. Anti-aircraft guns fire wildly, tracers arcing uselessly upward. Thunderbolts dive. Rockets slam into fuel tankers, bombs blossom across intersections. Strafing runs rake convoys end to end. Smoke columns punch upward, black and oily, visible for miles. A German officer near Hufeleis watches his regiment's fuel reserve erupt in flame. He knows immediately what this means. No fuel means no maneuver. No maneuver means no breakthrough. On another road, a Panther crew abandons their tank as Mustangs strafe the tree line, bullets stitching the snow around them. They run, slipping, weapons discarded. This is what the German High Command feared more than American numbers. More than Patton's speed. Allied air power turns movement itself into a death sentence. At SHAEF headquarters, reports flood in faster than they can be logged. Destroyed columns, burning depots, broken attacks, the German timetable already fragile begins to disintegrate. But it is in the German headquarters where the realization hits hardest. Field Marshal Rundstedt reads the situation summaries with growing dread. The weather which had protected the offensive has now reversed with brutal clarity. German units advancing westward are being cut to pieces from above. Supply lines are collapsing, reserves cannot move. The offensive has lost its shield. And in war, exposure is fatal. Someone mentions Patton. Not his maneuver. Not Bostonia. The weather. The idea circulates quietly, almost reluctantly, that the American general had anticipated this moment, that he had prepared for it psychologically as much as militarily, that while German commanders trusted forecasts, Patton had prepared his army to believe. Belief, Rundstedt understands too late, is a force multiplier. By nightfall, the Ardennes are burning. And deep in German rear areas, officers begin issuing orders that would have been unthinkable just 48 hours earlier. Orders not to advance. Orders to consolidate. Orders to prepare for withdrawal. The weather has spoken. But the most devastating consequence of the clear sky has not yet been felt. Because now that the Germans are visible, Patton is ready to strike them where they can no longer hide. December 25, 1944. Christmas morning. The Ardennes. Dawn comes pale and sharp, the kind of cold that stings the lungs and turns metal brittle. The snow hasn't softened. It has hardened into a crust that crunches like breaking glass under boots and tracks. Smoke still hangs low over the valleys, marking where German columns burned through the night. Above it all, the sky is clean. Unforgiving. For the first time since the offensive began, the battlefield is fully visible from foxhole to fuel dump, from crossroads to command post. And in that clarity, the imbalance of power becomes impossible to ignore. At 700 hours, Allied aircraft are already airborne. They fly low now, aggressive, confident. P-47s roar down river valleys, wings loaded with rockets. Mustangs sweep ahead, hunting anything that moves. Medium bombers roll in behind them, striking bridges, rail junctions, choke points the Germans can't afford to lose. This is not random destruction. This is systematic suffocation. German units attempting to reposition find themselves pinned in place. Every movement draws fire. Roads that had been arteries of advance become corridors of death. Vehicles bunch up. Commanders hesitate. Hesitation becomes paralysis. In one sector, a German Panzer Grenadier battalion receives orders to reinforce a threatened flank. They never arrive. Half their transport is destroyed before leaving the assembly area. The rest scatter into the woods, weapons abandoned, cohesion gone. A major radio's higher headquarters voice tight, "We cannot move in daylight." The reply is curt, "Then do not move." But night offers little relief. Fuel is low, ammunition lower, and the Americans are no longer content to wait. Patton's Third Army is advancing. Sherman tanks grind forward, engines snarling in the cold. Infantry ride the decks or follow on foot, rifles cradled, breath steaming. Artillery units leapfrog positions, guns thundering with renewed precision now that aerial observation is back. For days, Patton's men have fought blind. Now they fight with eyes open. At the front, officers notice the change immediately. German resistance stiffens briefly, then weakens. Counterattacks lose coordination. Artillery fires become sporadic, then fall silent altogether. And always overhead, the sound of engines. In Bostonia, the siege begins to crack. Paratroopers who have held through hunger and cold now advance behind rolling barrages, supported by tanks that finally break through the perimeter. German units facing them are exhausted, undersupplied, and increasingly demoralized. A wounded sergeant watches thunderbolts tear into a distant tree line and murmurs, "That prayer worked." He isn't joking. Word of Patton's prayer has spread, not as a joke, not as propaganda, as something else entirely. A story. Among American troops, it becomes a quiet point of pride, a symbol that their commander had refused to accept helplessness, that even when the sky itself seemed hostile, he had acted. Among German officers, the story lands differently. Interrogations of captured soldiers reveal a creeping unease. Americans talk openly about the weather breaking. About knowing it would break, about Patton calling it down. To rational minds, this should mean nothing. But war is not fought by rational minds alone. The German high command is already stretched thin, logistics collapsing, fuel reserves nearly gone, reinforcements impossible to move without catastrophic losses. Now, layered on top of this is the psychological blow. The sense that fortune itself has turned. At headquarters, planners revise maps with shaking hands. Arrows that once pointed west are shortened, then erased. New lines appear, defensive ones. Field Marshal Model commanding Army Group B understands the reality faster than most. The offensive has failed, not because of American numbers, not even because of Patton's maneuver. Because the conditions that made the gamble possible no longer exist. And they will not return. Weather forecasts offer no relief, clear skies are expected to hold. That single fact seals the fate of the operation. For Hitler, far to the east, the reports are infuriating. He demands renewed effort, accuses commanders of weakness, insists the Americans cannot sustain this pressure. But even he cannot argue with physics. Planes fly, fuel burns, men die. And German formations, once hidden and hopeful, are now exposed and hunted. Patton, meanwhile, does not dwell on the prayer. He moves. Orders are brief, sharp, relentless: exploit the break, press the enemy, give them no time to recover. To those around him it becomes clear, the weather was never the endgame. It was the opening. And now that the German army has been dragged into the open, Patton intends to finish what the sky began, December 26, 1944. Evening. Western Front. The cold deepens as darkness settles over the Ardennes, but the fear does not fade with the light, it sharpens. Inside German command posts, stone houses, school buildings, half-buried bunkers, officers crowd around radios and maps, coats still on, helmets never fully removed. Candles flicker, generators cough. The atmosphere is not one of planning but of accounting. Losses, fuel, time. All of it is running out. Reports arrive in fragments. Destroyed convoys, units out of contact, roads rendered unusable not by enemy ground forces but by the simple act of moving under a clear sky. The Allied air offensive has transformed daylight into a liability. A colonel slams his fist against a table. "We are being strangled," he says flatly. No one disagrees. In one headquarters, a staff officer traces a finger along a supply route on the map, then stops halfway. That section no longer exists. It was obliterated that afternoon, caught in the open by fighter bombers and reduced to twisted metal and burning fuel. The advance arrows drawn with such confidence days earlier now feel almost mocking. This is the moment German planners had feared from the beginning of Wacht am Rhein. The offensive was never designed to survive sustained Allied air power. It was a race against time, against fuel, against inevitability. Bad weather was the shield, surprise was the blade. Both are gone. Field Marshal Walter Model, his face drawn and gray, listens as subordinates describe units that can no longer maneuver, tanks that cannot refuel, artillery that cannot be resupplied, infantry that cannot move by day and cannot be supplied by night. Model understands there will be no miracle, no sudden reversal. The Ardennes offensive has reached its culminating point and passed it. And then quietly, almost reluctantly, another topic surfaces. Patton. Not his tanks. Not his troops. His prayer. No one says it with belief, not openly, but the story has spread too far to ignore. The Americans' sky changed. Their air power returned with devastating precision. Their morale surged at the exact moment German confidence collapsed. For professional soldiers trained to dismiss superstition, the timing is uncomfortable. One officer mutters, "They believed it would clear." Belief again. In war, belief moves faster than orders. On the ground, German soldiers feel the shift acutely. Veterans of the Eastern Front, hardened by years of brutality, now find themselves hugging tree lines, refusing to move in daylight, waiting for night that offers little safety and no resupply. They listen for engines. Every sound overhead sends men diving for cover. Even when the sky is empty, the fear remains. Air power has become omnipresent, real or imagined. At the same time, American troops advance with a confidence they had not felt days earlier. The prayer circulates again, now smudged, torn, folded into sweat-stained pockets. Some men read it, others don't need to. The sky itself has answered. Patton receives updates at a relentless pace. Bostonia has been relieved, German counterattacks are faltering, Third Army elements are pushing deeper into the southern shoulder of the bulge, collapsing resistance sector by sector. He listens, nods, issues new orders. At no point does he claim credit for the weather. But he understands something many commanders never grasp: perception shapes reality on the battlefield. By refusing to accept helplessness, he gave his army something to hold onto during its darkest moment. When the skies cleared, that belief transformed into momentum. Momentum the Germans cannot stop. Late that night, German high command discussions turn grim. Words like regroup and shorten the line appear, euphemisms for retreat. The final gamble has failed. And while historians will later point to fuel shortages, logistics, and Allied material superiority, those in the room understand the deeper truth. Once the weather broke, the outcome became inevitable. Because clear skies did more than bring bombs and rockets. They stripped away illusion. And with illusion gone, the German army in the West faced a reality it could no longer escape. For Patton, the war is not yet over, but in the Ardennes the decisive moment has passed. And it began with a simple act that seemed absurd at the time. A prayer printed on paper handed to an army, December 27, 1944. Third Army Headquarters. The maps have changed. What had once been bold German arrows pushing west are now broken lines, defensive curves, hastily penciled fallbacks. Patton stands over the table, hands planted wide, eyes scanning the new reality with cold satisfaction. The enemy is no longer advancing. He is unraveling. Outside, the sound of aircraft is constant now, an unbroken presence that has become as natural as wind. Allied air power no longer arrives in dramatic waves, it simply exists, watching, waiting, striking. Patton listens to reports with his usual impatience, but there is something different beneath it, not triumph, not relief. Confirmation. The gamble has paid off. Yet when a junior officer mentions the prayer, half-joking, half-awed, Patton cuts him off immediately. Don't get mystical, he snaps, God doesn't play favorites. But he does expect men to do their duty. The room goes quiet. This is the key: the prayer was never about divine intervention in the childish sense. Patton did not expect the clouds to part because of ink and paper. He expected his army to believe they were not beaten by circumstance. That belief matters. Military historians often talk about morale in abstract terms, but here, during the Battle of the Bulge, it becomes tangible, measurable. The moment the weather breaks, American units do not hesitate. They surge forward as if released from a held breath. German units do the opposite. They shrink. This divergence accelerates everything. Air power destroys supply columns, yes, but it is the psychological collapse that seals the outcome. Once German soldiers accept that the sky belongs to the enemy, every movement feels futile. Every delay feels permanent. In contrast, American troops feel invincible, protected, chosen not by fate but by preparation. The prayer becomes a symbol of that preparation. It circulates long after the crisis passes. Some men keep it as a souvenir, others lose it in the snow and mud but remember it anyway. It becomes a story told not because it is supernatural, but because it captures a truth about leadership under pressure. Patton understood the human dimension of war as well as he understood maneuver and firepower. He knew that when men feel abandoned by conditions beyond their control, they break. So he gave them something to push against the darkness. In German post-war memoirs, the Ardennes offensive is described with bitterness and disbelief. Veterans speak of the weather turning unnaturally fast, of Allied planes appearing everywhere at once, of a sudden certainty that the offensive was doomed. They do not mention Patton's prayer directly, but the fear is there between the lines. Because once the skis cleared, the Americans did not merely survive. They dominated. The Battle of the Bulge would grind on for weeks yet, but its outcome was decided in those few days when clouds parted and belief collided with reality. Hitler's last gamble in the West failed not with a dramatic surrender but with a slow, inescapable collapse. Fuel ran out. Time ran out. Hope ran out. And when the German army finally withdrew, it did so knowing that nothing remained to reverse the tide. Patton would later receive credit for speed, aggression, and audacity, and deservedly so. But the winter prayer remains one of the most revealing moments of his command. Not because it changed the weather, but because it changed his army. In war, steel wins battles, but belief decides them. And in the frozen forests of the Ardennes, when everything else seemed lost, Patton gave his soldiers something simple, human, and powerful. A reason to look up at the sky and expect it to change. And